Diversity, equity, and inclusion. DEI has been a goal, a function, and a discipline for many companies for decades. Some think that it's a moral imperative, but studies conclude that having a more diverse workforce in terms of race, ethnicity, gender, sexual identity, and orientation yields better financial performance because of the diversity of thought, perspectives, and innovation. So after all these decades, most companies still don't have workforce representation that reflects that of the US or their local communities. I think this failing is far more than a lack of commitment. Let me give you my take on the subject. Hi, I'm Ginny Clarke, a conscious leadership expert who spent 2 decades in executive recruiting and talent management. Having worked with giants like Google, Spencer Stuart, I discovered that the secret to transformative leadership lies in the 5 dimensions of conscious leadership. And I'm here to help you unlock your full potential. Join me on this channel as we embark on an honest and vulnerable journey together to become the kind of leader that genuinely inspires organizational transformation. As an African-American woman, I've been one of the few or only many times in the companies I've worked in. I've supported several diversity efforts and programs. And I've also been privy to hearing the sentiments of senior leaders ultimately responsible for the success of these efforts. I've been watching companies spend billions on educational programs, seeking to have better prepared pipeline of underrepresented talent, and hiring chief diversity officers to oversee the large sums being allocated to support these programs and policies. Here's what I've concluded: that there is pervasive and chronic organizational malpractice, as I like to call it, occurring in most organizations that have diversity programs and efforts. The leaders in these organizations are treating symptoms of underrepresentation like focusing on programs and philanthropy instead of tapping into qualified pools of underrepresented talent already in the workforce. Here's what I learned while at Spencer Stuart and Google specifically relative to improving diversity. The lack of representation is not the supply issue or shortage or lowering the bar that people want to believe that it is. Competencies, as you've heard me talk about, level the playing field. For the last 2 years, I've been working with a speakers bureau that promotes and represents me for a lot of trade and professional associations and corporate and academic organizations. And I address a number of topics around culture, employee retention and attraction, and DEI. You guessed it. One of the speeches I offer is called "You Don't Have a Diversity Problem, You Have a Leadership Problem." This issue of diversity comes down to behaviors of leaders who are not incentivized or held accountable for ensuring that there's a meritocracy that hires, promotes, and fires talent on the basis of performance and competence, and that's all talent. So here's one of the things that gets me. In most major corporations, they're the for-profit in the corporate world, which is what I know best. If a program is not working or an initiative is not profitable and you're not finding success, it's defunded. Now, defunded is a triggering word, and I'm not suggesting that companies just stop funding these efforts, but I think the difference is that there are accountabilities that have been built in to ensure that the beneficiaries of these efforts are indeed benefiting, and that those responsible for putting them together are also being held accountable for the viability, the efficacy of the effort. So it baffles my mind that in the diversity space, all these dollars are spent, especially the philanthropic dollars. And I'm not against philanthropy, but don't confuse philanthropy, giving to STEM programs, right? Because as a recruiter for senior people, that has little to nothing to do with what I was charged with doing. By that I mean STEM, you're trying to support science, technology, engineering, and math in communities with people with underrepresented backgrounds. I'm all in favor of that. But that's doing little to nothing for the people at the senior levels. So where is the accountability? And what I'm saying is, to the extent that there are people like I was in the tech sector from underrepresented backgrounds, we should make sure that we are supported. We got there in part because we have been twice as good. There's the old adage of being twice as good to go half as far. And I'm not gonna lie, I've continued to see that throughout my career in spite of some of these efforts. And I still hear people when I'm addressing large crowds who will say, well, we don't wanna compromise. And so one of the things I point to is the fact that, wow, that's interesting that you think that it would be a compromise to hire someone like me or a person of color who might not have gone to whatever school that you were privileged enough as part of a majority, a dominant majority, to attend, when people like my ancestors didn't even have access to education. So I'm taking issue with this, not because, and trust me, I am not coming down on chief diversity officers. I think many of them have been set up to fail. My issue is the rest of the leaders in the organization want to punt. And I will never forget, as long as I live, in my days at Spencer Stewart, when they kind of pushed me into this place of being, I couldn't be pushed but so far. I conceded that I would take on the role of the head of the diversity practice, and I was calling on, with one of my partners, the head of HR for Kellogg Company. And when she asked the two of us, tell us about your diversity program, he pushed his chair back at least 4 feet, and he pointed to me. And that, to me, said so much about the fact that these folks do not see themselves as having any role in doing anything differently to make diversity happen. And the diversity we're talking about is really representation, because then there's the inclusion part, there's the equity part, there's the belonging part, and those things have to do with policies that, again, are led by the predominant culture. White men, or in the tech sector, you might have Asian men included in that. And again, no one's coming down on any one of these groups, but part of what I'm saying is the accountability isn't there. You have the information. I've worked at these companies, and I know, and I've been a part of creating dashboards that go to the senior-most people that will say, here are the numbers for your organization, for your division, okay? These are like direct reports to the CEO. Here's how many people you hired. Here's the demographic breakdown of what they look like. Here's the demographic breakdown of the people who left the company, the attrition rates. And we know, at least in every case for the last 25 years, I've seen where the attrition rates for women and people of color are multiples of what they are for the dominant culture. And so I'm saying, if we know these things, right, the progression rates, meaning who gets promoted, same thing. Where's the accountability? You've got a heat map basically in front of you that is telling you these leaders are not making progress by the numbers. Do you think anybody got any less money in their bonus because of this? And so there needs to be, the accountability needs to be real. It needs to hit the pocketbooks of these leaders to get their attention. If they're not incentivized and it's hitting their pocket, they're not going to do anything. And so that's really my call to these organizations to make it better. If you really want to do something, hold your people accountable. I'm going to mention one other thing here, because this is a statistic that I share all the time. It's from 2016, a Gallup poll, and I've looked for updates and I haven't seen it since then, but it said that only 18% of those polled felt that their leader or manager was good, demonstrated strong leadership and managerial capabilities, meaning 82% of leaders are not good. So we've got, this kind of flies in the face if you're thinking about, oh, well, we don't want people who are coming in who are substandard, who don't have the right education or the right experience. Excuse me, you've got them already in your organization. They represent your majority. I'm not convinced that the leadership that we have in most organizations is that good from a competency standpoint. Everybody in a leadership role is not a leader. And so it's time that we start holding our organizations, whether you're a customer of one, a consumer of the products, a board director, there needs to be a better level of accountability to ensure that there is representation, equity, inclusion, and belonging. And that happens at the ground level, not from some, program that's been well funded, but leader by leader, business unit by business unit, being held accountable. That's what it comes down to for me. So if you're a leader who's part of the majority in your society or organization, realize that no one is coming to take anything away from you. Women and people from underrepresented backgrounds stand to enhance what the organization can do. But here's a couple things I need you to consider. Stop hiring your friends and hire on the basis of competencies. I'll keep saying it until you listen. Now, this might mean that you have to assess your own competencies and realize you might fall short compared to others. All the more reason to get the best talent around you. It's about time. Stop looking at the pedigree, which schools they went to, which colleges, what their grades were. None of those things is related to anyone's ability to actually perform in the role. And you need to begin to understand that great talent doesn't necessarily look like you or come from your neighborhood. Let me explain what I mean by competencies, because, and I'll be doing it a couple times because I think people need to hear it several times to begin to understand. This is how I was trained as an executive recruiter. People say, oh, they're skills. I have two definitions. One I've borrowed and one is my own. The first one is that competencies are skills plus knowledge plus ability. Someone can teach you a skill. You can go to school, you can learn a skill. Do you have the knowledge of the system of which you're a part to be able to be effective in executing that skill? And do you have the ability, mental, physical, emotional? That's real, because for people who are suffering from mental health considerations, their competency could be impaired temporarily, right? So skills, knowledge, ability, that's what a competency is. Though also the way I describe it is they are the deconstructed elements of how you do something. Because it's not just have you done it before, you could have done it poorly. And if you heard me when I said that 18% of leaders are considered good, well, sounds to me like you've got a lot of people who might have strong functional or domain knowledge and competency who don't necessarily have leadership competency. They're different competencies. As a recruiter at the senior level, I was looking for leadership as well as functional competencies. So you and I all know people who are indeed partially or completely incompetent, but who have a great looking resume, right? So let's get real with that. And people who, and for myself included, I didn't have, as I moved from different industries, I didn't always have the experience in that industry or in that role, but I had competencies and I was able to describe those and how I could add value. So if everybody started hiring on that, you'd have a very different complexion of your workforce, trust me. And oh, by the way, for those of you that have global organizations, why are you not looking globally for your talent, right? Local talent has been proven to be more effective for the position. If you're hiring in Peru, then hire a Peruvian. And there's a really good chance that you will find someone who does indeed have the capabilities, even if they don't have the direct experience. There are unique cultural considerations that they can help you with to probably make your business do far better than if you were to have an expat go down from the home country. I need you to hold your teams accountable for hiring. This goes back to some of the numbers that I was throwing out before. You know, you can count. And I resist the notion of just representation because it's so much more than that. And I certainly don't want to see tokenism where, oh, let's hire this black person even if they're not qualified, right? That's an insult and you're setting the person up to fail and it sends the wrong signal across the rest of the organization. So please don't do that. Hire people who are even better than you, who can add value to your team, who come from all backgrounds. That's the goal, based on competency, and make sure that you are training not just your people, the hiring managers, but everybody who might be interviewing these candidates, and that you are assessing the same, using the same criteria to assess when people are being considered for promotions. and when they're being considered for termination. Their competency has fallen away or the needs have shifted. So that's what I need you to do. Another one is, I need you to have zero tolerance for bad behavior. Zero tolerance. You can't look the other way. You can't witness something or hear about something and say, oh, well, that's just the way they are. No, that's not enough, because we're continuing to see microaggressions and behaviors that completely undermine employee morale. You want to have a strong company? Then hire and retain the best people. And oh, by the way, I don't think I've made this point, but it links together. The culture that is going to retain people, that culture is determined by your leaders and what they will and will not tolerate. Now, if you're a person from an underrepresented background inside of or seeking to join an organization, I need you to know your value, and not just monetarily, but holistically. You have no doubt had to overcome racism, misogyny, other forms of discrimination to achieve what you have. And I don't want you to dare allow anyone to make you feel less than. I know I have in my career, because we have generations of trauma in certain of our communities that have allowed us, even of generations like myself, who came from educated parents, who have been successful, but we've had to overcome a whole lot of programming that many of our counterparts never had to endure. So I need you to also stop thinking and waiting for the organization to change. You need to be the change. And what does that mean? I need you to set boundaries and show people how you expect to be treated. Now, I've said it many times, and I'm just going to keep saying this. We belong here. All of us do. I personally want to see the most diverse organizations, not just because I'm a Black woman, but because we haven't seen it in a long time. There is not a meritocracy that's operating here. And I need for those of us who come from backgrounds like mine to understand that and to start demanding it. You have more power and influence than you realize. So again, show people what you mean, what good looks like. Tell people, and I say people instead of companies, because that's just a legal construct. There are leaders making decisions. You need to address them one-on-one and bring them along. And yes, that is more burdensome for us. Very often it is, but it's to everybody's benefit. So show up, don't wait for things to change, you make the change, and then at the end of the day, you vote with your feet. This stuff makes me tired sometimes. I mean, I really kind of get tired of talking about it, but I get energized when I realize that we've been probably thinking about this in the wrong way for a really long time. And that it's time that each one of us can take responsibility, and that there is nothing to fear here, unless that's what this whole thing has been about anyway. Has it? I think we have, those of us like me, who've been the minority, we've had to fear being accepted. We've had to fear not being good enough. When in fact, I think it's kind of been the other way around, hasn't it? I don't know. What do you think? I know firsthand how taking that first step can be the catalyst for a life-changing transformation. I remember the moment I decided to harness my own strengths, and it made all the difference in my career. That's why I've created a career mapping tool just for you, to help you uncover your unique competencies and leverage them to design your own career map. Take the first step towards your next level by clicking the link in the video description, and let's start this incredible journey together.